Colleagues, let us welcome the Auditor General, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke. No, thank you very much. Good afternoon once more. To the Vice Chancellor, Prof. Taron Pretorius, Mr. Magida, the Executive Director of Human Resources, our keynote speaker for today, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, the staff from the AGSA, Auditor General South Africa, managers, HODs, and directors that are with us present today, colleagues, staff, students. Thank you very much for attending today, more especially in this weather. My name is Mandla Onkenochawa, and I am a staff member at Human Resources Department here at the University of the Western Cape. I'm delighted to be your program director for today's event, and it is an honor and a pleasure, of course, to host the first edition of the Human Resources Leadership Series, hosted by the Human Resources Department of the University of the Western Cape. Firstly, as I've said, I would love to extend a warm thank you for taking your time, more especially in this weather, and of course, knowing very well that you have other commitments. It's after hours, but you have taken this time to be here with us today. Thank you very much. More especially also to the ones that are watching us at home. It's a pleasure to have you. Our theme for today, Bridging the Gap, Building Ethical and Effective Leadership, is of great importance. Is of great importance in a time when leadership challenges are more complex. The need for leaders who are ethically grounded and are those who are highly impactful is very clear. Therefore, this theme for today speaks to our collective responsibility of ensuring that in our areas of influence, our leadership practices are of integrity, are transparent, and of course, are very impactful. As you'll hear from our Executive Director, Mr. Meko Magida, this leadership series we're hosting today is not just about, it's more than just about a series of talks. It signifies the intensification of an ongoing journey that UWC has been embarking on. a journey towards building a leadership culture that not only drives the strategic goals of the institution as they've been articulated in the institution operating plan, but also reflects the core values of the institution, the 5 core values of the institution, which is academic excellence, engagement and responsiveness, collegiality and collaboration, integrity and accountability, and of course, inclusivity and diversity. We have a full program ahead of us, featuring the keynote address from the esteemed Auditor General of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleka. Her insights into leadership and governance will, of course, provide us with much more to reflect on. I know that all of us, including our virtual audience, who are watching us via YouTube, are looking forward to engaging in these discussions. I encourage everyone to participate actively. Later in the program, I will, of course, open the floor for questions and comments after the keynote address by our speaker. So please feel free to share your thoughts and take notes as we go through our agenda for today. To officially welcome us to today's event, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome the Vice Chancellor and Rector, Prof. Tyrone Pretorius, to give us the welcoming remarks. I'm not welcoming you, I'm asking you to join us. You are going to do that for us. So let's give the round of applause for the VC.
I have to constantly remind me that I'm stepping down at the end of the year, because in days gone by, I would have just been able to get up here, and I was on my way here when I realized, no, you need the steps. Ms. Tsakani Maluleka, the esteemed Auditor General of South Africa, Mr. Meko Magida, Executive Director for Human Resources, all our distinguished guests, our colleagues, our students, visitors to the campus, welcome to UWC's inaugural session of the Human Resources Leadership Series, proudly hosted by our Human Resources Department, who takes very seriously their responsibility to develop the next cohort and the next generation of ethical leaders. I think this option, Mr. Magida, of online or in person, really expands our choices too much. On days like these, at the last moment, you would say, nah, it's raining. I'll watch it on YouTube instead of attending in person. And yet we are all so much enriched by being in each other's company, by exchanging ideas, asking illuminating questions. I would like to extend a special word of thanks and appreciation to Mr. Magida and to the Human Resources Department team for organizing this program. I have previously commented, I think it was during induction, I was commenting on the service ethic of the Human Resources Department, and really their genuine commitment to be of service. Sometimes they take it a little bit too far. If it's your birthday and you're a staff member, you get a personal email from me that says, Dear Meko, congratulations on your birthday. Hope you have a wonderful day. And on my birthday, I send myself a congratulatory message. But Mr. Magida, your efforts and the efforts of your team have been invaluable in bringing this event to life. We appreciate your hard work. We are honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Ms. Chakani Maluleka. With extensive experience in governance and accountability, Ms. Maluleka will deliver the presentation, Bridging the Gap, Building Ethical and Effective Leadership. While I believe this is the first time you're visiting our campus, Auditor General, your proxies sits in our audit committee every year, and one of them is just sitting behind you, Mr. Magida. We are confident that this lecture will be an enlightening experience for all attendees. We also hope it will inspire us to continue to cultivate a culture of integrity and effectiveness within our university, but also, more importantly, beyond the confines of our institution. Ethics and integrity are values that are sorely needed in our broader societal context. The theme of today's seminar, Auditor General, resonates deeply with our core values here at UWC. Ethical and effective leadership aren't just abstract concepts for us. They are guiding principles that shapes our actions and our decisions every day. Our engagements today will focus on not only identifying challenges, but through the engagement with you to find actionable solutions. As we delve into these conversations that we will be having after your keynote address, I encourage all of us to reflect on how we can apply these principles to real-life situations within our university, but again, an appeal that we should also consider applying it in our context outside of the university. Many of you would know that I strongly believe in collective leadership, that I strongly believe leadership is not a position. You may be the vice-chancellor of a university, that does not automatically make you a leader. Leadership is a role that you play. And within that context, anyone can be a leader. Anyone can lead from where they are. It's about only putting up your hand to lead. I invite you to put up your hand to lead in the spaces and the places where you come from. Once again, welcome, and I look forward to the keynote address and the engagement thereafter, Auditor General. Thank you.
Thank you very much, VC. For those that do not know, I once led the Student Representative Council as the president. And when my term was coming to an end, people used to call me the outgoing president. I would be so mad. Because it's a continuous reminder that, hey, it's gone, this thing. So VC, I relate to what you're saying, that it's gone. It's gone. So thank you very much, VC, for those words. Hopefully, they are going to resonate with all of us. As we continue with our program, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Meko Magida, our Executive Director of Human Resources. Mr. Magida has been instrumental in conceptualizing and, of course, bringing to life the Human Resources Leadership Series. His leadership and, of course, vision has been central in ensuring that This series not only exists but aligns deeply with the strategic goals of the institution as articulated in the institution operating plan. In his remarks, Mr. Magida will share more about the significance of the Human Resources Leadership Series and how it represents an ongoing chapter in our collective effort to enhance leadership at UWC. So colleagues, please join me in welcoming Mr. Magida.
At least I went to the right side of the podium, VC, and that explains my age. Program Director, Mr. Mandla Onke Nochawa, I'm very uncomfortable as I stand here being showered with all these accolades, as if I'm the one who's responsible for this event and some of the activities. I don't think the credit must come to me. I think the credit goes to the department, and in particularly yourself and some of the interns, because this is a program, as I mentioned to the AG, which is driven by the interns. We are beneficiaries of the Presidential Youth Stimulus Program, and we have a number of interns that have joined us, and the Department of Human Resources at the University of Western Cape has been also be privileged to have a number of very brilliant, talented, energetic, individuals like Mandla, Uyanda, Tigen. I don't see most of them. I'll only mention that I can see. And the number of, so there, I think in our department alone, we've got close to about 8, if I'm correct, that are within that department. But in broader than for that Department of Human Resources, I think it's closer to 70 that have been enrolled for this program. So the credit for this event must definitely go to them, not to me. And I'm just somebody who's backing them up, and this is their idea. Rector and Vice Chancellor. Thank you so much, Rector, Vice Chancellor, Professor Tyrone Pretorius, esteemed guest of honor, South Africa's Auditor General, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, and members of the University Executive. I just saw our Executive Director for Finance and Services walking in, Mr. Mani Regal, and I would like to invite him, if he may, to come to the front. I know that he has been coordinating some of the things related to this program. Other members of the executives that I've not noticed, because at least I was able to notice him as he walked in, deans of faculties that are also present here, if I didn't see them earlier. But I did see one who's going to be assuming a responsibility as from next month, and I'm so proud that she's been somebody who has been very close to all our programs and supporting them at all times. Professor Anita Patnamun, who's joined us today. I don't see her where she's seated. Yes, but she's always been supportive of HR programs. Officials of the Office of the Auditor General that have been accompanying, and I know that among them there are some of them who came through UWC in order to reach her office. We're so proud of them. And senior officials, academics, professional, administrative and support staff of UWC, members of the UWC Student Representative Council and the UWC students that have joined us today, officials and members of the UWC Employees Union. I see the chairperson where Mr. Techano's joined us today. Everyone who's with us this afternoon, good afternoon. Those that have joined us online and those that obviously have defied this bad weather to come and sit here. Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to today's presentation on a topic that is of profound importance, bridging the gap, building ethical and effective leadership. It is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today in order to engage on a topic that lies at the heart of progress and positive change, ethical and effective leadership. The world of work in the 21st century is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, as people will refer to as VUCA. This is the context that we operate within, and it is no different to higher education, and particularly at a sectoral level and national as well as at global levels. According to Professor Chiliza Marawa, who's the rector of the United Nations University and the Undersecretary, Secretary General of Higher Education at UN, he says, open quote, higher education is under immense pressure worldwide. These pressures are underpinned by a global trend of digital transformation, massification, aging academics, high turnover of academic staff, wellness of staff, diversity and equity management, globalization and internationalization, close quote. With this background and narrative in mind, there is an increased demand for South African universities to continuously bridge gaps, build ethical and effective leadership. And it is within, using that theme, that's the reason why we're hosting this event. In an age where the demands on leaders are both unprecedented and evolving, the principles of ethics and effectiveness have never been more critical. Today, we gather to explore not just what it means to lead, but how we can lead with integrity and impact. I'm looking forward to a talk by the AG as she will delve into most important things to assist us to define ethical leadership and, of course, examine the strategies that can drive effective outcomes. Former President Nelson Mandela has often been quoted to say the following, I quote, leadership is not a title or a position, it's a responsibility. I think I must repeat that. Leadership is not a title or a position, it is a responsibility. He continues to say, it is about influencing and inspiring others while remaining steadfast in your principles, close quote. I concur with Madiba. Leadership is often seen as a position of power. My submission is that true leadership transcends titles and hierarchies. As Madiba said, it is about influence, responsibility, and the ability to inspire others. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, says the following about leadership. I quote, leadership is about making decisions that uphold values and foster trust within our teams and communities. And most importantly, it's about being a beacon of positive change, navigating challenges with both moral clarity and strategic acumen, close quote. So what the UN Secretary General tells us is that ethical leadership is not just about adhering to rules or regulations. It is about embodying integrity, as the VC has explained earlier on. It is about transparency. It is about respect in every action and decision that we take. It means taking choices that are not only legally sound, but are also morally right. This involves a commitment to social justice, including fairness, equality, accountability, and genuine concern for the well-being of others. When I was trained and together with others to become future lawyers, we were told that the foundation of a successful lawyer is not built solely on strategy or vision. We were told that it is deeply rooted in ethical standard. So this is what we're told as future lawyers. So in order to be successful, you need to embrace ethics. And it is so embarrassing that I've been learning of late that most of those that are writing the board exams, the only paper that they are failing is that paper that deals with ethics. And I'm wondering what could be the reasons. And apparently this is the most difficult paper, paper 3. Over the years now, as an executive and a former manager, I now learn that effective leadership, on the other hand, is about achieving results and driving progress. It requires clear vision, strategic thinking, and the ability to adapt in the face of challenges. It's about setting goals and motivating teams to reach them while fostering an environment where creativity and collaboration is to thrive. Our conversation today will be rich with insights from a distinguished speaker and a thought leader who has dedicated her career to understanding and cultivating leadership that stands the test of time. AG, your extensive experience and expertise in auditing and public accountability are immensely respected. And we are excited about the opportunity to learn from your perspective as UWC community. So as we delve today, as we deal with the topic of bridging the gap, building ethical and effective leadership, your contribution today will undoubtedly enrich our understanding and inspire a great meaning of what it means to be ethical as a leader. I extend my deepest appreciation for the exceptional dedication and integrity that you've demonstrated in your role as the Auditor General. Your tireless commitment to upholding transparency and accountability, particularly in an environment fraught with challenges, does not go unnoticed. In a country where corruption and indiscretions can undermine trust and progress, your work stands as a beacon of integrity and diligence. Your thorough and courageous approach to auditing is vital in ensuring that public resources are managed responsibly, and those that are in power are held accountable for their actions. Your contributions are not only critical to maintaining the rule of law, but also to serve an inspiration to all of us to value the ethical governance, which is very critical. So the challenges that you face, AG, in your role and your team are substantial. And yet you continue to perform your duties with, what is referred to as a remarkable and outstanding, exceptional professionalism and fortitude. So please accept our heartfelt gratitude for your unwavering commitment and for the positive impact that you have made on our nation's governance. Your efforts are invaluable, and we stand in support of your good work. In conclusion, thank you for being here and for your commitment to advancing the standard of leadership. Together, let's build a future where leadership is synonymous with ethical integrity and effective impact. Thank you for taking time to be with us. We are eager to engage with you and to benefit from your knowledge and experience. Colleagues, dear colleagues, as we embark on this journey, on this conversation and dialogue, I will ask you to engage in the robust and in the most, engaging manner, with the AG today. This has to reflect the culture of UWC, that we are engaging, following our leadership, particularly that is led, institution led by Professor Taron Pretorius. So I would like to welcome and thank you. I believe the VC has already welcomed, but I want to thank the VC particularly for making time out of his very busy program to join us today and always to be able to embrace the idea of ethical leadership. He's not only talking about it, I can give you that guarantee, not that I'm buying his face that is in front of me, but he walks the talk. He's somebody really that we look up to at all times. We'll certainly miss him, as he's really trying to make us to prepare ourselves that he's going to exit. We are not going to allow that to happen sooner, I can promise you. But nonetheless, I think it's an engagement between me and the VC. But thanks to everyone, thanks to Mandla again, and I really appreciate my appreciation for this important event. Thank you so much.
Sorry, VC, you can't relate. Thank you very much, Mr. Magida, for those insightful thoughts. And of course, I believe that all of us are really looking forward to the AG so that we can be able to internalize what she's going to give us, that food for thought. And also I see that Mr. Regal has joined us. Mr. Regal, where is the money at? Thank you very much for joining us. Colleagues, it is now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, a distinguished leader whose career and contributions have had a profound impact in our country. Ms. Maluleke is a trailblazer in the realm of public accountability and governance. As the first woman to be appointed Auditor General in over 100 years, she has set a powerful example for women in leadership roles. Prior to her current role, she had served as the Deputy Auditor General, bringing with her more than 20 years of experience across diverse fields, including auditing, consulting, corporate advisory, development, finance, investment management, and skills development. Ms. Maluleke is a seasoned business leader with a wealth of corporate governance experience gained through her participation on numerous corporate boards and strategic committees in both the private and public sectors. Her commitment to service excellence, ethical leadership, and the advancement of transformation has been recognized by esteemed organizations such as Black Management Forum, the African Women Chartered Accountants, the Black Business Council, and the Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants of the Southern Africa, of which she is a past president. Her leadership and dedication to upholding the highest standards of accountability in the public sector makes her an exemplary figure in our quest for ethical leadership. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from someone who not only advocates for good governance, but also actively implements and oversees practices that enhance transparency and integrity across all levels of government. Ms. Maluleke's insights will undoubtedly provide us with a valuable guidance on how we can be able to cultivate and strengthen these principles within our spheres of influence. Her perspective on ethical leadership and good governance is crucial as we strive to bridge the gap between ideal leadership and the realities we face. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as we welcome our keynote address, Ms. Sakane Maluleke.
Thank you so much for that very kind, most edifying and truly humbling welcome by yourself, Program Director, by all of you ladies and gentlemen that are in the audience, by yourself, Prof. Pretorius. It's a wonderful privilege to share a podium with you and to at least see you as you are bidding farewell. It sounds like you already started your farewell roadshows, although some may be in denial, Mr. Magida. I wish you well as you adjust to this impending reality. But thank you for your very kind welcome. And as I was listening to you, I couldn't help but notice that there's such alignment between how you view leadership and how I do as well. So I do hope that my input today will certainly add value to the audience here. The academic staff that are here, I believe the CFO is here, no? Welcome, sir, Mr. Moneybags. I'm glad that my team members who harass you on the audit committee are here, and I hope you can experience them to be, really nice people, actually. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to greet my proxies, my colleagues from the team AGSA. These are individuals that I'm truly privileged to walk alongside as we do the work that we are charged with in service of our country. I truly am humbled by this invitation that has been granted to me and the opportunity to spend time in this conversation with you. And humbled not just as a professional and the recognition you've afforded me, but also as a woman, especially this being the month within which we celebrate Women's Month and we remember the contribution of women in attaining South Africa's democracy and in the continued work that is underway for us to realize our ambitions as a constitutional democracy that benefits all of society. Thank you for affording me this opportunity to talk about a topic I feel very strongly about, which relates to leadership in its effectiveness and ethical posture. I think it's a very powerful way that you framed it. Ethical leadership that is effective and efficient, and I want to add my own words to that, leadership that gets things done. That's what we should be all worried about. And this is one of the principles we at the AGSA, the Auditor General of South Africa, consistently call for throughout the public sector. As an esteemed academic institution with tremendous history and heritage and legacy of contributing to South Africa, UWC, one of your primary roles is to shape young minds so that they can contribute to the better future we dream of, not just for themselves, but for all of us in society. Here, future leaders are being built, which makes this topic particularly appropriate if we are all going to make a meaningful and lasting contribution to realizing the South Africa we all want, for ourselves and for all of us across the generations. At the heart of the success of a nation lies good governance, a commitment to transparency, to accountability, and to responsible leadership. In order to achieve this, those that lead institutions must uphold these principles unwaveringly. Transparency ensures that our actions remain open to scrutiny, paving the way for trust and confidence in the decisions we make, while accountability ensures that those who are appointed as stewards of public institutions are indeed answerable for their actions, creating a system where wrongdoing and wrongdoers don't find refuge. Through adherence to ethical values and an unwavering commitment to improving the lives of citizens, those that lead public institutions can establish a culture of good governance, one that serves as a shining example for all in our nation. This is how our country can keep the promise of a better life and a better future for all of us, by practicing ethical and effective leadership. This type of leadership is about demonstrating the appropriate conduct and understanding that leaders owe to the people that they serve a complex set of ethical duties, duties that relate to not just their individual needs, but importantly, duties that relate to how they impact the rest of society. It's about setting the right tone and setting an example for those who look up to you. Whether you are working as a leader in business, in government, in civil society, in student politics and student arrangements in terms of governance of institutions. Sometimes it even deals with leaders who happen to be pastors in their communities and their churches. It's about anyone to whom people look for guidance, for inspiration, for hope, for an example. So, I want to echo the words uttered earlier on. All of us can choose to show up as leaders in our own spaces. Leadership is about demonstrating strong moral principles that will point out wrongdoing, even when it doesn't benefit you. Maybe let me put it this way. Leadership is about pointing out wrongdoing, especially when it doesn't benefit you, and showing what's right at the core of being an ethical leader. That's what it is. Ethical leadership is characterized by a few things, and I'll just highlight a couple more. Fairness and equality. Everyone wants to feel like they're being treated fairly and not being discriminated against, whomever they are, especially if they happen to be different from the majority of people in that space. Trust, openness, and honesty, which really is the glue that keeps teams, communities, organizations, society together. Accountability for any decision you make. And sure, it's very easy to take accountability and responsibility for a decision that you deem as good or that other people deem to have been good and having a positive impact. But accountability even for the decisions that don't go so well. That's what leadership is. Owning up to the decisions you make, owning up and taking responsibility for the impact of those decisions, regardless of where they end up. Respect. And I know that was said earlier on. Leadership is about respect for self and respect for others. Respect for self, but importantly, respect for the views of others, especially when they differ from you. It's about creating the space to hear the different perspectives and space to honor those perspectives. Perhaps one of the figures in South Africa's landscape that has displayed ethical leadership is none other than the founding father of our democratic order, Dr. Nelson Mandela. So I know this is a name we're mentioning for the second time at this podium tonight, and I don't think that's an accident, because he demonstrated through not just words but actions the strength that comes from ethical and effective leadership, the sacrifices that go with ethical and responsible leadership. And it's no accident that every year in July, the whole world takes the time to honor that legacy, to commemorate him. It was the display of respect for the law and the judiciary and the trust that he had truth on his side that made him agree to go to court when rugby supremo Louis Late tried to resist transformation and instituted court proceedings against our head of state in 1998, something that was completely unheard of. And I want you to remember, 1998, we were still new to this idea of a constitutional democracy. Because he believed in transformation and the correctness of the cause, President Mandela decided that he would lead by example, he would show humility, even though it was no secret that the court appearance was meant to humiliate him, to belittle him. The lasting lesson from this entire case was that the courts are to be respected as the final arbiters in any dispute, and everyone, and underline everyone, must accept the rule of law. And as we all know, in the more recent period, Madiba and his legacy have been pilloried in many quarters because some amongst us feel that he was not radical enough or that he was not effective in delivering the democratic dream with its attendant dividends. But the truth is, when all is said and done, it benefits no one if all that is left to inherit are ashes. And maybe Mandela was that right and effective and ethical leader that our country needed at that particular point in time, given the circumstances that prevailed at the time. Let me come back to the AGSA for a moment. As you may all be aware, the Office of the Auditor General of South Africa, which I'm privileged to lead, is a construct of our constitution. The country's supreme audit institution is what we are, subject only to the constitution and the law. We are one of the independent state institutions that are charged with the duty of supporting and deepening our country's democracy. And we do this by enabling oversight, accountability, and good governance throughout the public sector, through the audit work that we do. And as you probably know, when we audit, we look at financial and performance management practices across every single institution where we audit. And so we get to see every single public institution in South Africa at least once a year. Whether it's a municipality, a department in a province, a department at the state level, at the national level, or whether it's a public entity or a state-owned entity of any scale. We have the duty and the authority to scrutinize their books, their records, and to offer an opinion on how they've managed the resources that are entrusted in their hands. And through our audit work, done independently, and through our reports and our regular engagements with a number of different stakeholders, we aim to contribute to improving the well-being of our democratic order and, in turn, driving an impact that does improve the lives of citizens. We believe that the spirit of the Constitution calls on us to keep figuring out how we do more than just audit, issue a report, show up at a meeting, and hope for the best. When we look at the landscape, we know for sure that if we are to be experienced as people who are ethical and effective leaders, then we too have to keep thinking about how we do more. In this regard, we draw inspiration from the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, INTOSAI, which calls on all supreme audit institutions, all auditors general, to help citizens by holding the custodians of public resources accountable, and thereby promoting efficiency, accountability, effectiveness, and transparency of public administration. So what we are trying to do, this more that we keep asking ourselves to do, that we believe the world or South Africa is asking us to do, that question isn't something that arises only here in South Africa or in the AGSA. It's a question that all auditors general across the world are seized with. How do we all use our independent mandate, our capabilities, our access, our reach? How do we use all of that to do more in terms of impacting the lives of citizens? In their seminal work on why nations fail, and I suspect many of you would have been familiar with that work, authors Darren Ajumolo and James A. Robinson posit that the answer to the puzzle in terms of why nations fail is at least partly the absence of institutions that shape the overall governance in terms of economic, social, and political policies of a specific country. They say that those that succeed have followed an institutional path which results in effective institutions that are able to render policies beneficial to their citizens. Now, these two authors have an argument that's much wider than what I'm saying, but for the purposes of today's conversation, and with regard to South Africa as it is today, I'd like to narrow in and really focus on the questions about the role of institutions of governance. Governance institutions are important, and how they are run is absolutely critical. In a country where governance institutions are strong, it is difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is difficult for a nation to take a wrong turn and find itself failing if its institutions are strong. Perhaps the question then becomes, do we as South Africa have these strong institutions? And what does the answer to the question, whether it's a yes or no, what does this answer mean for us? What leadership values would have helped to build the stronger institutions amongst us? And the reverse would be true. What leadership values and practices would help to rebuild or to strengthen the existing institutions? Our country is facing a number of challenges, which can leave us all feeling quite frustrated and hopeless. Widespread leakage of public resources compromises service delivery and often leaves our infrastructure in tatters. Whilst I acknowledge the challenges we face, I believe there's still hope. There's always hope. And this hope I share with you today is because we've got to see that some institutions are at work, and this has been good for our country. For example, it's not that long ago that all of us were glued to our TV sets watching the theater of different testimonies at the commission that the then Deputy Chief Justice Zondo was chairing. We've since seen the reports which detailed horrific accounts of ethical leadership and governance failures. And these failures essentially paralyzed many state institutions, and they stalled service delivery. They stalled our progress. Fiscal, economic, personal, all of us have felt the impact. Our nation is still suffering from the effects of the transgressions of that era, with citizens struggling daily. The work of the Commission brought serious transgressions to light, and it harshly reminded us of why we need to protect our institutions, to make sure we don't go back to that era. Another example of an institution that is at work, I would suggest, is the Independent Electoral Commission, the IEC, which was tested to the limits in the context of the most recent elections that were held on the 29th of May this year. Because that institution is built on strong, sustainable foundations, it was able to withstand the pressure and prevail when its work came under intense pressure and scrutiny. Now, in any country, the failure of an election, whether it's real or perceived, that failure can lead to chaos. And we know that that sort of chaos serves only the interests of those who want to benefit from the prevailing chaos and confusion. I would argue that the test of any democracy and its leadership core is seen through the resilience of its institutions when they face challenges. The secret to building and maintaining good institutions lies in the ethical posture that leaders take up and embed as a critical component of the organizational foundation. Ethics have been described as the principles of conduct that govern an individual or a group, and within the context of an organization, an ethical culture is the collection of principles regarding what's right and what's wrong, what's acceptable and what's not, what's rewarded and what's sanctioned. Articulating values and transforming them into norms is the goal of every culture change initiative in any institution. Many organizations have very impressive sets of values, and they often emblazon them on their walls and their websites and their banners and other media, right? And maybe that's the easy part. We tend to go away for boss parades, and we spend a great deal of time with consultants who help us shape different words, and then we put them up with pictures, and then we think the work is done. But here's the thing. If the leaders and the people in the organization do not live these values, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to shift. Maybe we ought to think as values as ethical commitments, accepting that if the leaders don't live up to those commitments, those values are meaningless and the culture will not shift. Perhaps an example will bring the picture home, and especially given that we're in the Western Cape. The failed global retail company, Steinhoff, which had interesting values. Maybe let me tell you what the values were. The values were trust, respect, commitment, and loyalty. That's what they professed as their values. And as you and I now know, much of what led to that spectacular failure, and a failure that destroyed value for each and every one of us here, the failures that led to that problem were really about a set of behaviors and choices made by the leaders of that institution. And those choices, I'm sure you'll agree, were quite far distant from what they had professed and committed to do, which is to build trust, respect, commitment, and loyalty. There are a great many widows, great many pensioners, great many younger investors that still lament the impact of that market crash by Steinhoff. Ethical organizations seem to score better in terms of the bottom line and overall performance. In fact, a scientific study done in 2003 by a researcher named Cameron identified that organizations that are ethically based outperform their peers and competitors, whether you look at profitability, productivity, innovation, quality, customer retention, and employer loyalty. In other words, an organization with good ethical grounding is likely to reap the rewards where it matters most, in engaged employees and a better bottom line. In such cases, there is trust between the organization and the people it serves. And if you look at your context, yes, you might not worry too much about the bottom line. That might not be your primary issue. But there are great many criteria you would use to evaluate performance, and the connection between what this institution does, the engagement of the employees, the engagement of the student body, the engagement with alumni, and the value add in perception and reality to society and to the economy in the longer term. Leaders are responsible for creating that level of trust by being courageous, true to their word, and being constantly aware of the social contract between those who lead and those who are led. When trust breaks down, when this particular trust breaks down, it's usually the result of the leader's behaviors being incongruous with what values they would have professed. When we are cognizant of the need to remain congruent between what we promise and what we do, what we profess and what we practice, that's when we'll be able to close any trust deficit between ourselves and the people we lead and the people we serve. At the AGSA, we work very hard to remain cognizant of our values. And the values we have, we've said, we build trust, we care for each other, we excel in all we do, and we do the right thing. I can't imagine anyone would disagree with any of those values. And we know that writing them out and agreeing on them is the easy part. The tough part is to make sure that all of us walk the talk. And we close the gap between what we practice and what we profess, so that over time, people experience these values in motion. We've also got to work pretty hard to ensure that our organizational policies and practices are consistent with the values. And we're always working hard to find synergy, so that, as I say, we don't do one thing and say something else. And it's really an intentional campaign within the institution that starts with the leaders and doesn't end, it continues with the leaders. But then the rest of the teams, there's an ongoing process to ensure that we keep testing each other on how we are aligning with these values. Being human beings, none of us are perfect. The trick is to make sure that we continue to hold each other accountable as we grow towards what we have all agreed is our aspiration. Now, as the independent auditors of the public sector, our focus in terms of the work we do is to ensure that we use our audit insights and our influence abilities to bring about an appropriate leadership posture in the public sector, so that public institutions are led by people who both understand and are able to provide the necessary stewardship. And this is the best way to ensure that the greatest possible value is derived from every rand that is spent, ultimately benefiting citizens. If a steward isn't one that's ethical, one that's responsible, one that's conscientious in his or her duties, if they don't do that, that's when you'll continue to see leakage of public funds, and you won't close the gap between what an institution should be doing with the resources in their hands and what they actually do. We share these insights that we glean from the audit work we do, and we share them with the people who run every public institution, and hence that's why we spend so much time with yourselves here. We also share them with the executive, so every member of cabinet has the benefit of spending time with our teams. We also spend time with the people in oversight, so those are the councils, the legislatures at provincial as well as national level. For the longest time, at the AGSA, we were doing this. We were auditing, sharing reports, engaging with different people, and we found that they were not acting on our audit reports. They were not acting on the findings or on the recommendations. And what came out of that was that they themselves understood as legislators that it was important to change this. It was crucial to change the law so that the AG could support the follow-up of the implementation of his or her recommendations. So we had these new powers given to us through an amendment of the Public Audit Act, which essentially is a follow-up mechanism, and I'm happy to talk more about it in the question and answer session. All it is that we follow up on whether or not those stewards are doing what they're supposed to do. So when we identify that there's an issue that comes up in our audit, and we can see that it is having a direct impact of losing money for the state or causing harm to the public or causing harm to an institution, then we raise it much more strongly. And our powers allow us to give stronger recommendations, to refer matters for investigation to public institutions such as the SIU or the Hawks, or even the public protector, depending on the mandate. When those investigations are done, we then have the ability to take remedial action, such as forcing the accounting officer to take disciplinary action or to report a matter to law enforcement. And if they still fail to do that, we then have the duty to look into issuing a certificate of debt, which is essentially getting them to pay for some of the loss, if not all. It's a complementary mechanism, we're often at pains to say. The people who run institutions remain primarily responsible for doing so. So the trick to getting public institutions to perform in a way that's in accordance with their given mandate and to effectively use the resources in their hands, the trick is to make sure that the people who lead those institutions are people of competence, people of good ethical posture, and people who are going to be effective in actually implementing on the mandate. No one else can step in to do it for them. We can all force, we can all cajole, but the reality is, for as long as we don't invest in the capability of the people who are running state institutions, we're not going to be able to get the performance where we should. We've been able to use these powers to get some money back into the coffers of the state. At the last count, for provincial and national government, the number is about 2.5 billion rand that's come back as a result of our efforts. And in the context of local government, the number is just over 500 million rand that's come back as a result of our efforts. The losses we identified were 14 billion rand in provincial and national government, 5 billion rand in local government. So if I say we've recovered a total of 3 billion, and on the other hand, I'm saying we've seen losses that we've been able to estimate at a combined 19 billion rand, you can see that there's a big gap between the two figures, right? What that tells you is that we've got to worry about the effectiveness of the people who are running these institutions day in and day out. If we don't get that right, we won't be able to close the gap between those two figures, between what's lost and what's recovered. We've got to find a way to get them to prevent the losses in the first instance, to pick up that a loss is happening and to deal with it quickly, and to make sure that they discipline and they strengthen controls and they go after money that's being lost quickly, and not rely on the AG who has to keep reminding you and following up, because then time marches on and you can't get the money back. We are often at pains at the Office of the AG to highlight that effective leadership is not about perfection. It never can be. In an institution that's got 1,000 transactions happening every single month, you're likely to have one or two that trip you up. The trick is to have the type of controls that don't make the one or two 100. You have only one or two, right? And the trick is also to make sure that when one or two does happen, you can pick it up quickly and deal with it. So what we have found is that in the better managed institutions, the issue is not about perfection. The issue is about responsiveness to problems pointed out by different people, whether it's internal audit or external auditors, and to quickly deal with it. That's what makes for, I think, an effective leader. Not to pretend there are no problems, but to remain open to the possibility that your system can be strengthened, and to remain open to learning alongside your team and using every failure, every problem as an opportunity to learn and to get better and to strengthen, so that you don't have that same problem this year. Next year, you can deal with something else. That's what effective leaders do. And as I said when I began, and I said, openness and transparency and accountability for our decisions is what makes for effective leaders. Because if you are not open to learning and understanding how a problem came about, and to be fair in your analysis of that problem and not to scapegoat, if you don't do that, your likelihood of fixing the problem for good is very, very low. I also want to touch on one other area of effective leadership, and I think also ethical leadership. Sometimes we find that those that run public institutions want to be awarded and rewarded and acknowledged for attaining clean audits. So they've complied with the law, they've complied with the need to put a service delivery report that's accurate, and they've also done their debits and credits correct. And they'll get a clean audit, and that's fine. So they're transparent, and they are able to demonstrate that. That's important, but it's the beginning of what you've got to do as a leader. You must still perform. You must still make sure that that which you are supposed to do, you actually do. You cannot expect to be applauded for using state resources, and yet your mandate remains unfulfilled, and you don't want to engage in a conversation about why that would be. I'll give you a small little example. Sometimes we'll have a department, let's call them a department responsible for supporting and monitoring municipalities in their province, departments of COCTA, right? And they get a budget, and they're supposed to do a few things. They're supposed to meet with municipalities regularly. They're supposed to have support programs to help municipalities deal with their problems. They're supposed to review the plans of municipalities to make sure that they are coherent and well coordinated for the province. And they're supposed to ensure that where there is capacity that's needed somewhere, they assist municipalities. So we would find that there would be those sorts of departments who would get a clean audit because they say what they've done, but the municipalities in their province are in shambles. So we started asking the question and looking at things a bit carefully. And we found that it was things like in their reports for service delivery, they would put things like meet with municipalities 5 times a year. Okay? And then you get a tick because you can show, 5 attendance registered, duly signed. and so they've done it. And now it's not the AG's job to plan the performance of that department. But we can use our insights to say, but hang on. Sure, your MEC and your legislature allowed you to get away with 5 meetings a year, but you're not meeting your objective. You're not fulfilling your mandate. And yes, you can tick the box, but to what end? What is it you're causing? So we believe that the call for ethical and effective leadership must include a conversation about ensuring that every single public institution does what it is supposed to do. And sometimes there's a reason why they can't do what they said they would do, but let's make sure that they are transparent and accountable about it. If they say, we are going to build 7 dams over 5 years, it's a good aspiration, right? And then something like COVID happens, and no one is building dams in lockdown, but also the money gets allocated towards the response to COVID. But they must be able to account and say, well, we said we would build 7, but you know what, we can only do 3. Surely that's a conversation we can countenance as citizens. And they show you the 3 that they've done. It's a different matter when nobody's any the wiser about, by the way, was it 7 or 5 that they planned for, and how many did they build? That conversation somehow disappears from our discourse. So perhaps that's something that I can throw into the pot for consideration within UWC, not just in terms of how you function, and I know that's been the preoccupation here in terms of how the leadership core here does its work, but perhaps that's an area for academia to be seized with. At AGSA, it's an area that's gaining much more attention from us. It's been very exciting, mesmerizing for our teams, as they've been able to learn a lot more about what their institution ought to be doing, and also having much more impactful conversations with the people that they are auditing. So don't be surprised if when my proxies show up at the audit committee table, and they're no longer just telling you about the reconciliations of the suspense account, and they want to talk about things related to your mandate and want to push you around how the people that are enrolled for courses here, those courses are consistent with what the economy needs. Because we believe that that's the more we can do. And this is all in the quest for us to become more effective on our mandate and more ethical in responding to what South Africa demands of us today. I want to make one last point. Leaders have got an intergenerational responsibility. If you're a leader today, the leaders that came before you, their legacy follows you, good or bad, right? And similarly, what you do as a leader today, your contribution will be judged in the context of what came before you, but also in the context of what comes after you. So there's a reciprocity that happens across generations, and we have to be mindful of that. The question I keep having to answer for myself, and I share it in the hope that it might inspire you to ask yourself similar questions. I ask myself, well, today I stand as the Auditor General. There were many Auditors General before me, one of whom came through the corridors here, the late Magwetu. I have to keep asking myself the question, what contribution do I make to protect their legacy and to build on that legacy? How do I make sure that their time in this role counts? And it counts in relation to how my time will be seen. And I also ask myself the question, the next person that becomes AG, the next 2 people that become AG, to what extent do they find an institution that's even better than what I found? So that they can continue to ensure that it delivers more and more into our constitutional democracy. It also helps that I'm the first woman, because it deepens my inquiry. I have to keep asking, how do I make sure that I normalize female AGs? How do I make sure that I'm not the last one? How do I make sure that no one ever questions whether a woman can do this job? And the way I can do it is by being successful. Not for myself, but for their legacy as well as for their future. So I believe that leadership is an invitation for us to really consider our role in the journey of humanity. And in a young country like ours, many of us happen to be first this, first that in institutions, in our communities, in our homes, in our families. The question is, what do you do with that invitation? Do you start to see it as a burden, or do you embrace it as a responsibility and a privilege? And I'm glad that we have young people in the audience today. And I'd like to invite you to keep thinking about that. What will be your contribution to the journey of building institutions that nurture talent, that make life better for the people that come after you? Because that you are seated here today is credit to the work and the toil and the prayers and the sacrifices of many that came before you. It's easy to talk about the people whose names you know. Much more difficult, and I suspect much more impactful, if you think deeply about the people whose names you do not know, whose prayers and sacrifices were just as impactful in getting you to where you are. And how will you make good on their contribution to where you are? So that, again, the ones who come after you have an even better experience as part of this multi-generational reciprocity. I'm aware that we're going to have a question and answer. I'm going to end my inputs here in the hope that I've given you a few things to think about. And I'm going to ask you to remember that it is leaders who set the tone of their institutions. It is leaders who will develop a vision, but importantly, it is leaders whose behavior, whose values, whose choices actually shape the organizations that we have, the institutions we have. It is those leaders, because of their significant impact, that have a tremendous responsibility to show up in a way that honors the duty to lead. So thank you once again, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you very much, AG, for your insightful and thought-provoking remarks. Sometimes you just wish that you hear these things before you take even leadership responsibilities. And I speak for myself. But perhaps some of these things that you have said, it gives me some thoughts about myself, because I've also taken some responsibility in the few years that I've been at UWC to lead students. Now, when you get to be reminded of the core values that exist and what the actual experience is, it's something that's very interesting. But when I opened up, I spoke about the core values of the institution, which have been articulated in the institution operating plan, which is academic excellence, integrity and accountability, collaboration and collegiality, engagement and responsiveness, inclusivity and diversity. Now, you've mentioned something very interesting that speaks about leaders who do not reflect the core values of the institutions in which they lead, which is a very interesting phenomenon, particularly in our context at UWC. And this begs the question for everyone that is here, that in the spheres of influence in which we live in, do we reflect the core values of the institution? And this is a question that we should ask ourselves, particularly those who are leading in whatever level in which they lead in. So that's something that I took from your engagement, AG. And of course, we might have taken something very different. What the AG has said might have provoked some questions, some thoughts. And now that's exactly what I'm going to do. It is to give you an opportunity to share the thoughts that you have, the clarity-seeking questions that you might have, the questions that you think the AG should expand on. There's a very interesting things that she might have touched on, but she didn't really dive in deep. And now that is the opportunity for us to be able to engage with that. So what I'm going to do in the interest of time, and also this goes to the audience via our YouTube live stream, of which they can also be able to ask questions there so that we can also share them with the AG. If you have any thoughts, any question that you have, you'd love to pose to the AG, now would be the time. I'm going to take 3 or 4 questions and then give the AG an opportunity to respond to the questions. And if we have time, we might also go for another round of questions. So you can raise your hands, colleagues, and my colleagues are going to pass on the mic. I see one hand, number 2, number 3, one more, yes, 4. Colleagues, Uyanda? Yes. Please just keep your numbers, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. President, show me. The one before me. Yeah, it's the guy there.
No, thanks, Annelisa President. Thank you, Program Director. I'm a postgraduate student here in the University of the Western Cape, and greetings to everyone, and thank you for the enlightening contribution to thought to the AG. I want to develop from what the Program Director was speaking on. But I want to take a different direction. He's touching on the core values as part of that which a leader must be able to echo. But I want to take a shift. I'm wondering, because we have our dispositions with President Nelson Mandela, one of which you have touched on, particularly us as so-called born frees. But the question of transformation, I wanted to say revolutionary, but I want to speak, to an audience that at least can hear the argument. As it relates to transformation, how much of transformation, where it relates gender, where it relates race and class questions, how much of that aspect in relation to, of course, what the program director was speaking about of the core values, how much of it is embedded in leadership? Because I'm taking your tone, for instance, I'm going to make a minor example wherein a leader is expected to be ethical, right? They check they do all the checks and balances internally in a particular university. But then what you find is that such an individual, as ethical as they may be on the book, the type of leadership that they exercise, their style of leadership, will find them persecuting, for an example, employees, allowing mass casualization, outsourcing things at the expense, of the worker, in a particular situation. And you'll find that, something as simple as a gardener, you'll outsource that. But on the book, you are hitting all the checks. So I think you are speaking around recommendations, but I'm wondering how that thought can be navigated. Onvai, VC is laughing. He knows what I'm trying to say. I know he knows. But I wanted just to touch on that one as a first aspect, right? I think just lastly, because you were speaking about stakeholdership, in governance processes. This argument of empowered stakeholders. I wonder again, how much of it is, because you were referencing the judiciary, etc., and even the AG's powers, and their relevance in terms of attaining, certain leadership, or rather being an impactful leader. How much of an empowered stakeholder is relevant for true transformation or true impactful leadership? Those are two distinct things, but because you are referring to, for Istanbul, you'll find in a municipality where a union, for example, is a part of the council by virtue of being the majority union. How much of that value can be, transferred into impactful? I hope you are following the thought, AG.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
President Mshomi. Number 2 is here. Colleagues, number 2 is here. The guy with the beanie, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm the first year here in University of Western Cape. My question is I want to know, so to Auditor General, how do you make your job, make sure that your job remains unbiased and objective? Thank you.
Very short and simple. I love questions like that, with no, with no preamble whatsoever.
Thanks for the opportunity to.
Please hold it close so that we can be able to hear your leadership.
Okay. My name is Nzalo Ngovini, and I'm a first-year student here at the University of Western Cape. So I have 2 questions also. The first one is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face in ensuring government agencies are held accountable? And can you please provide an example of a significant finding from your audit on how it impacted the public policy or government practices?
Thank you very much, leadership. Another very short, to the point. At the number 4 is there.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My first question, the guy has already asked it, and the second one is that since we are students, I just wanted to find out, I'm a student, since we are going to the next world after we exit the UWC, I just wanted to find out, is there any other resources available for students to reflect on and also develop on the leadership capabilities? Are there any framework or something that students can embark on, so can develop in this leadership thing?
Okay, thank you very much, leadership. I think those were the 4 first questions. We're going to give the AG. If there's still an interest, we're going to take another row of hands. So if you're not noted now, it doesn't mean that it's closed. Just keep your question, try to think how can you make your question very short and simple. So, AG.
Thank you. These are challenging questions, Wanda. Okay, so maybe the one on the guidance for how students can link into frameworks and tools for engaging with their leadership building capabilities. I would like to leave it to the leadership of the university to engage on that. One of the things I found worked for me when I was a student many years ago was that I got involved in all sorts of committees, whether it was in the student res, whether it was on sports. Listen, I even put together when I was at UCT in '94, I put together the inter-campus rugby thing. I know nothing about rugby, but there I was, listen, I was like vice president of this thing, putting it together. Why? Because I was trying to understand a lot more about people, about the institution, and also trying to use volunteerism to learn and grow as a person. And that stood me in good stead. I've always volunteered, whether it was in black accountants stuff and in SAICA and the professional body, always volunteering, contributing in a way that helped me not rise to the ranks. I rose because I was working. I was always hard at work. But it taught me a great deal about people, about the complexity of society, about the challenges of people beyond just my narrow world. So maybe that's something you can take home around how you could also learn by contribution. I believe that these things are based on in action. The question about the accountability challenges we experience when we audit, one of the key things that makes accountability difficult in the public sector is instability, especially at the administration level. You can imagine when you're trying to drive accountability and the municipal manager or the head of department keeps changing. Every 6 months there's somebody new, you start the conversation all over again. And you can imagine that if a CFO has to put together a team of people to run the finances of an institution, they need time. It doesn't matter how bright or how high your qualifications are. If you're not in your job for more than a year, you still aren't sure on how things work, let alone establishing the right things to be actually embedded. So I believe that instability, especially at the administration level, is one of the biggest weaknesses on accountability, but also on performance of public institutions. One of the things, you asked me about the impact on policy when there are problems. One of the things I remain saddened by is that there were a number of policies put in place to drive black economic empowerment, as well as to drive the localization and the reindustrialization of our economy. And those policies were put together and the laws were promulgated in a way that would help us get there. The problem was that those laws continued to be flouted. And so we never got the outcomes we were hoping for. So instead of somebody actually procuring from a black person who happens to make particular widgets, whatever it is, make a particular product, they would flout the law and buy from somebody else and import this thing from China, and it's a very strange thing, and unfortunately then our economy would suffer because the people here would lose their jobs. So our experience has been that there are a number of policy instruments that are put in place in good faith, but because we have yet to instill a culture and a set of disciplines and practices that make for adherence to the law, we don't get there. We don't get the result we seek. And then what we do is we run and say the law does not work. But how's it going to work if no one's implementing it? Then we want to keep changing the law, but we don't fix the problem, which is that compliance with such a law isn't there. That's one of the things, personally, I've observed over the last number of years, and I worry about it, that we are quick to say a particular law isn't working, but we've not really tested it. How does AGSA remain unbiased? I think that's a wonderful question. So let me start here. So people think I can give a clean audit or deny a clean audit, but very quickly you realize that I don't even audit, personally. I don't. And that's deliberate. Because, okay, the task is too great, there are too many institutions we have to audit. We do like 1,000 audits every year. So what we do is we hire professionals to actually do the work. My job is to put in place the systems, the codes, the processes, the frameworks, and the oversight mechanisms to ensure that they're doing what we expect. Make sure we hire people of competence, and I'm glad you see them here. I can vouch for them. These are top quality individuals. We have over 1,000 chartered accountants, qualified chartered accountants that work at the Office of the AG. And that's deliberate, because it helps us do what we're supposed to do, so that I can be seen as somebody whose institution that they lead does what it's supposed to do, because we have invested in the capability of the people within the institution. We also have a methodology that is clear and everyone follows it, so it's a very clear sense that takes away bias. There's a code of ethics that we all subscribe to as professionals, but also as employees. We drive awareness programs around the importance of maintaining ethical conduct. And if there's a problem, we deal with it. We also make sure that there is no one who can audit on their own. It doesn't work like that. In an audit, you operate in a team. So it doesn't matter how angry the one person might be with you on a particular day. They are not the person who's going to conclude on the file by themselves at a point in time. So the audit process has enough checks and balances through the technical work, the methodology, but also the involvement of a greater number of people at different parts of the process, so that the ultimate product is a technical product, one that is not influenced by personal feelings or not. I hope that gives you a good sense. And then there was the big question about transformation and leadership decisions. So let me try and answer it this way. Leaders should be worried about building institutions and building institutional capability. That's what's going to make for effectiveness, whether of transformation as an imperative, of effectiveness as an imperative. If you don't worry about ensuring that your institution where you lead has got the people of competence to get the job done, you're going to keep misfiring. And sometimes you misfire because people don't know what they're supposed to do. So because these things are complex. You see, a decision to outsource or insource can be very complicated. So you need people who have the competence to engage with that complexity and to make the trade-offs and to then be held accountable for those trade-offs. But the focus, I believe, must always be about what is going to build the institution, and to be transparent about that and make those trade-offs. I'll give you a very easy example. At the Office of the AG, and fortunately the law provides for it, the law says the Auditor General must be a qualified and registered auditor. That's the law. Ne? You could easily go and find an auditor who just, newly qualified, and now, you put them as the AG. But the many people that came before me have made it their business to ensure that they build a pipeline of people who are in the institution, and so succession isn't a big problem. They build an institution that's characterized by effective delivery on its mandate. So you can both transform and not just safeguard, but continue to improve performance. Because transformation should never be equated with lack of competence. I believe you must do both. Otherwise, you're actually compromising the people you are trying to have benefit out of your transformation objective. If we don't set up the young people we have in our institution for success, then what's the transformation for? The institution I lead today, we mirror South Africa in its population demographics. There are 3,600 of us, predominantly African, just like South Africa. Majority young people, just like South Africa. 68% of us are people under 34, just like South Africa, right? Predominantly women, 56% or so, just like South Africa. It's the one corporate citizen in South Africa that looks like the country it serves. And that happens because of ethical and effective leadership. Leadership that sees with making sure that they build an institution that is characterized by competence and excellence. At the AGSA, what we do today, we have the largest training program for graduates who come out of university and they train to become chartered accountants. The majority are African people, first-time graduates in their families. Majority are women. That's a transformation imperative, isn't it? And it's deliberate. But what we do is we make sure that they pass the same exams everybody else writes. And so that when they walk out of the institution, they, in reality and perception, are equivalent, if not better, to their peers coming from elsewhere. And what happens? They can go anywhere. Many of them stay, but guess what? The majority, because that's what empowerment is, it's about giving you the ability to make a life for yourself and make choices for yourself. Many of them go overseas, recruited by my fellow AGs because they see quality there. Many of them being recruited by the public sector and the private sector in South Africa. That, for me, is what transformation is about. And it comes out of ethical, effective leadership. I believe that we've got to do both. You've got to drive excellence and transformation. Otherwise, you make it difficult for the people you're trying to benefit through these projects. So I hope, as impassioned as I am, I've been able to answer your question with some cognitive appreciation for where you're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, AG. I was sitting down, and while you were answering the question of how to ensure that the AGSA is not biased in its audit. Now, I thought people were going to ask the most interesting question that you normally find, which is who audits the Auditor General? Right. Now, while I'm seated there, it led me to a thinking that says that there are bodies that exist in whether in public institutions, whatever the case might be, that are there to ensure that the governance of an institution is in that way. There's leadership and then there's governance. Now, in that whole aspect, leadership, the management of an institution is bestowed with the responsibility of carrying out the operational mandate that is there. Then you have your governance bodies whose responsibility is to carry out the governance of an institution. Now, in that whole reality, how do we ensure, going back to this question of who audits the Auditor General, you are the supreme auditor in the country. Yeah. Therefore, you'd be the last auditor in the country, right? Goes back to, in institutions of higher learning, you would have the highest decision-making body of an institution. Now, if you as an Auditor General don't carry out your responsibilities of ensuring that you abide by the values in which you have, I assume, I know the answer, but I would love you to answer it for me. How do we then ensure that you are not biased, and who then guards you to ensure that you are not biased? Now we go back to these institutions. How do we ensure that our governance structures, which are the highest decision-making bodies, abide by the values in which institutions of higher learning has, or your private sector, whatever the case? How to ensure, because there's a lot of challenges that are faced inside institutions of higher learning and outside in the private sector. But how to ensure that the board of directors, your council, whatever the case might be, abides by the core values of an institution? Because management is held accountable by these bodies, but these bodies, who holds them accountable for the decisions in which they take for our institution? That's my question. Now, colleagues, two more questions, just two, so that we can be able to close it. I have one there. I have two here. There was, okay, three, but there's no, it must reflect the AG spoke about this. It must reflect. So it must reflect. We have a female, we have a male, we have 2 females, and a male. Reflects the demographics of the country. Let's go leadership.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you, AG, and thank you to HR, obviously, for this opportunity. My name is Ayanda Takane. I'm a graduate, and I'm also a server of the workers here. I'm the chairperson of the Workers' Union. I think, AG, my question is twofold. The first one is, you've given a couple of examples, Steinhoff being the one. What are the sort of signifiers, just from the top, when you look at an institution, in terms of ethicalness, effective leadership? What are the core pillars that, as the audience, as we sit here, that when we look at the institution, we are able to see those things? It's one thing to have the values in laminated brochures, but it's another to actually live them out in your everyday as an institution, to an extent that we as the workers or the academics or the students actually experience them. That's one. And then the second part is when the ethical or the moral compass or the decay has colonized itself, for example, in those key sort of areas that are supposed to, from a governance point of view, that are supposed to guide the institution to this ethical and effective leadership, how do we as the general sort of public or the general average man that is part of this community able to hold leadership accountable? Because they are the leaders. And if they've colonized in each and every sector that is supposed to, or each and every area that is supposed to be the checks and balances, when those don't work, what do we do as the average sort of people part of this institution? What do we do? And I think also just to lash on, I think what Mshumi has said, how do we hold the leadership accountable? As the average people, first year, third year, second year, as the workers, how do we hold them accountable? Thank you.
Thank you very much, leadership.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. My first question, I'm Yasmin. My first question is, are there any examples from other countries that have been in similar situations as South Africa that have managed to address corruption well? I'm just curious what they've done. And my second question is, thinking about the difference between corruption and negligence, let's say a CEO or director is corrupt, and then that gets approved by management, and then it gets approved by another manager, and then it gets approved, then the graduate does the work. How do you kind of impose consequences when it comes to that chain? Do you just like punish the person at the very top? And what happens to everyone kind of below who also allows the corruption to happen?
Thank you very much. My sister here.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mamkele Nyangiwe, and I am in the Master's Sports for Development program. And I would like to ask, what are some of the biases and stereotypes experienced as a woman in leadership, and how would you advise, how would you address these challenges? And the second one is, how can men and women work together in creating a more inclusive and equitable leadership landscape? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that, colleagues, is the last opportunity for us to engage. We can have those side engagements, but now the official program for questions ends here. And then we're going to get the response from the AG. I know, colleagues, it's not every day where you see the AG. It's only because of HR now we see the AG here. So,
Okay, so I think I'm also going to have to try and be brief so that I also get invited again. I mustn't say she goes on too long, you can't have her here. But thank you so much for those questions. Let me start with the gender question posed at the end. My sister, I think it's true that any woman leader does deal with all sorts of biases and stereotypes. The one that I'm acutely aware of is the one that goes along the lines of assuming you can't do the job, whatever job it is. It doesn't matter how ambitious you are, whatever job you get next, there's an assumption that you can't do it. And not because of anything other than just a stereotype. And so what men enjoy, which is an assumption that they can do the job, we don't enjoy. I'm watching with interest what's happening in the United States now. There's a big debate about whether or not Kamala Harris can do the job. And everyone thinks, no one's asking if Trump can do the job. And you kind of like, but she's the vice president in the current context. How do you overcome it? My sense is that as women who are getting into newer spaces or newer terrain and doing things that women haven't done before, our job is to really do it well so that the next person can stand on our shoulders. If I observe what's happening in the US now, Kamala Harris is the first Democratic candidate, right? But before her, there was Hillary Clinton. And before Hillary Clinton, there was another lady, a black woman actually, I've just forgotten her name, who did run for president many years ago. Her presidential campaign was very short, but it did exist. And that gives the platform for Hillary Clinton to come along, and that gives a different platform for Kamala Harris to come along. So if she wins it, when she wins it, she must do so well that the next time a woman candidate puts her hand up, the question isn't can she do the job? You know? So that's kind of, we can moan about it, but I feel like we must just embrace it as part of the journey. In terms of how we deal with these stereotypes going forward, I think we've got to keep inviting men to the conversation. I think all too often as women, we want to lament and complain, and we do it by ourselves. And it's nice to have the high teas and to really comfort ourselves, right? But I think it's also just as important to really invite the men into a proper dialogue. I was saying to some people recently that it sometimes feels like the men just have to keep their heads down. If it's August, for the whole month, you can't say a word. You must just behave nice, and then you can live again, 1st of September. Ne? And but that's not how it should be, because the conversation should be about what's good for society, right? And keep reminding each other as to the why. Right now in institutions, every time a woman gets promoted, you find that the men feel like, but why isn't a man being promoted? And you're like, but look at the numbers. It's quite evident why you got to get women in, right? But I think we're not having enough of a conversation across society about the importance of representation. Similarly, I think if you look at young people today, young women, I'm not sure, I think the statistics here are no different, Prof. It is young women who are doing better in throughput, because I've looked at the national figures, in throughput, certainly in our profession, but broadly, than black men, especially. Now the question becomes why, and how do we deal with it? Because in the course of driving gender advancement, you shouldn't be creating a different imbalance, because that's going to cost you another generation or two down the line. In fact, I suspect some of what we're seeing around GBV is a lot to do with that, but that's a different conference for that conversation. The conversation ought to happen with men in the workplace, in our homes, in our churches, to keep reminding them, not as a fight, but as a gentle reminder of why it's important, why representation is important. Because these are the men who are going to be fathers to girls, if they're not already. And the question has to be, what world do you want your girls and your boys to live in? There was a question raised about the governance arrangements in the AGSA. So let me quickly deal with it. Who orders the auditor? The auditors? So yes, we are supreme, but we do the same things we expect other people to do. Because we know independence comes with accountability as well, and responsibility. You won't take us seriously if we are doing things that we don't expect you to do. So just like you, we have independent auditors who are appointed by Parliament, where I account. They are appointed on the basis of a recommendation by an independent audit committee. That audit committee also deals with our internal auditors, who have a dotted line to them, and they guide the work of internal audit. We also similarly make sure we have an annual report, and that annual report is the basis of engagement in Parliament. So we do all those things you expect us to do. We subject ourselves to scrutiny by a number of different players so that we can keep making sure that the integrity systems within the AGSA are consistent with what we anticipate other people ought to do. Even the work we do around empowerment is about saying the things we expect other people to do, which is to observe the rule of law, we must also do it. Even our supply chain, we must also do what we expect other people to do. So I hope that helps. And I think it answers the question partly of how other institutions should operate. Any institution that enjoys autonomy has to expect that the scrutiny they must increase. If you want to enjoy autonomy, because here the AGSA is independent, right? We are one of 2 countries that enjoys full independence for their AG, and that's an assessment by the World Bank. It's great to have independence, but it comes with responsibility. You must work on your mandate and deliver relevant work, quality work, which is what we try hard to do. And you must also be accountable and transparent and be associated with good governance and exercise and scrutiny. When we go to Parliament, SCOEC kicks us out and talks to our auditors in our absence. It's good practice. You do it here, right? The audit committee. You don't go to audit committee. The audit committee. Because it's good practice for scrutiny to happen, for oversight processes to happen, and for us to keep learning and getting better. I wanted to quickly deal with there were 2 other questions. One, Ayanda, you're asking, what happens, how do you hold leaders accountable? I think it's about making sure that where's Ayanda? I think it was this side. I just couldn't see you from where I was seated. I could hear the voice. It's about making sure you use the platforms that are available to you to engage properly and to even read the material that's there. You know, if you have the strategy of the institution in your hands, you can then understand the trade-offs that are being made between insourcing and outsourcing. And then you can engage properly. But to howl doesn't help. If you have the ability to engage in different platforms, whether it's at council, use those platforms, prepare properly for those platforms. And I know it's frustrating when you feel like you're not being heard, but don't howl at the expense of using these platforms as well. So my invitation to all of us, and you know, I was also young and I also used to like to howl, but I've learned the hard way that you probably score more goals by engaging properly. And fortunately, you guys are much more matured at your age than what I was. Your ability to actually use those platforms will probably be a lot better. Ayanda's smiling. I feel like he doesn't believe me. But having experienced life a little bit longer than you, that's the only advice I can offer. I wish I'd understood that better when I was younger. So, in terms of consequence management, ma'am, I want to quickly, because there were 2 questions about how other countries dealing with corruption and consequence management. If there's a problem, I believe you've got to investigate properly, get to the facts about what happened, and then discipline everybody in the process. You are disciplining them for different things. And discipline them and mete out a just and fair sanction. And so the lawyers in the room will know more about how you get to that answer. But of course, it would be unjust to make the creditor's clerk lose her job because she was listening, or she was being bullied by her boss, right? But you've also got to hold her accountable for breaking trust between herself and the institution. And holding her accountable might not mean firing her. It might mean something else. But she's got to feel the consequences of that choice because you want to correct it. The person higher up, that's the person then you mete out stronger consequences for. And I believe that's how you get to a fair and equitable way of meting out punishment for people who've done wrong. I hope that helps. But I think everyone must be subjected to proper scrutiny and to discipline, corrective action. In terms of other countries that have seen the type of corruption we've seen and how they've done it, it's not always transparent how countries are, what the levels of corruption are and how they're dealing with it. From engagement with my fellow AGs across the world, we are learning that there is an increased focus on building institutions. And it's institutions that support governance, such as the AG's office, such as internal audit mechanisms in different institutions, because that's one of your key enablers for driving improvements on controls and oversight, right, and accountability. It's also about worrying about the capability of the law enforcement agencies. That's got to be a key focus. Strengthen the ability of the police and the investigations arm to actually make sure that they do their work without political pressure and have the resources to do what they're supposed to do. If we look at the guidance that came out of the Zondo Commission and those different recommendations, those things feature quite strongly. And if we look even at the report of the FATF grey listing that came through and what it is we've been told to do as a country, you can see that there are elements associated with rebuilding our ability to mete out consequences, criminal consequences, to forfeit and seize assets that were being stolen, to hold people accountable in a way that's visible, because that's one of the ways you're going to push back on a culture of impunity, and also to make sure resources are invested in the places that would have been weakened in the accountability ecosystem. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Thank you very much, AG, for your response to the questions that have been posed. And yeah, thank you very much, and also for your address. But as we are about to conclude our program, because in the interest of time, we're supposed to conclude by 6:30. I'm going to now call Ms. Shamima Matthews to give us a vote of thanks as the manager for staff development at UWC Human Resources. Let's give it up for Ms. Shamima.
Thank you very much. I think Mandla asked me because he said I must be quick. So it's a great privilege for me to do the vote of thanks. Firstly, a very, very special thank you to our Auditor General, Mr. Kani Maluleka. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure I speak for the entire audience for saying thank you for your thought-provoking and insights in terms of doing the work that you do. We know that it's not easy. And also, we said it before, for Women's Month as well, paving the way as being the first female to assume this position. So thank you very much. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of the entire audience to say thank you for all the leadership principles that you've given us. And we hope that it's not going to be your last visit to UWC as well. And then also thank you very much to our Rector and Vice Chancellor, Prof. Tyrone Pretorius. Thank you so much, Prof, for availing yourself. I also know we've got some members of our executive, Mr. Eagle at the back. Thank you so much, Mr. Eagle, for making the time. And then to our Executive Director, Human Resources, Mr. Meko Magida. Thank you, Mr. Magida. Thank you so much for your leadership and for introducing this wonderful initiative, which I'm sure everybody has found useful. So thank you so much for that. And then Mr. Magida's office colleagues has been hard at work, and I'm sure you can imagine putting this all together. So please join me also in giving a hand to our wonderful program director and my colleague Mandla for holding the fort and keeping things together. Thank you so much, Mandla. I know Mandla didn't do it alone. It was also with the assistance of our wonderful interns, Tegan, Yuanda, and Sharon also, who I believe is somewhere here. But thank you so much, and to all those involved. And then, colleagues, also thank you very much to all of you in the audience, for those watching online. I don't want to be too long. I know we still need to travel safe home. So take care, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, colleagues, that concludes our business for today. I know a lot of other people are very excited for this time because they get to go there and engage with other people that side and what is called floods and all of that. But it was really an interesting evening and an interesting event. But this, colleagues, is not the last one. There's a lot of engagements that we're going to have with the Human Resources Leadership Series. And there's a lot of topics that we're also going to engage on. I believe that the others that perhaps you might find interesting is fostering diversity and inclusion in the workplace. That's one of the themes that we're going to look into. But also, I think President Mshumi would be happy about this one because I think he loves transformation a lot. If you were to look at all of these seminars that we attend, there's one question that he always asks: transformation. So there's a lot of other things that we are going to look into. Also, transformation in higher education 30 years later. Where are we and where do we go from here? So those are some of the glimpses insofar as what are some of the topics we are going to cover in the Human Resources Leadership Series. And hopefully we are going to take time and also attend them. And and colleagues, thank you very much again for attending, and travel safe and engage very well that side. That could